I'm going to mute everybody out. We're going to go ahead and get started. Today is May 2nd, 2020. This is Saturday, noon Pacific time, or it's about 12:06 now. And we have Eric Dollard on the line here. And so Eric's website is ericpdollard.com, P for Paul, which is his middle initial. So ericpdollard.com, and these calls support EPD Laboratories, Inc., which is a 501c3 nonprofit corporation, and all donations are tax deductible. And on the ericpdollard.com website, there's a donate link, or you can scroll down and look in the right column, and there's an address if there's anything you'd like to pitch in by either money order or check. And there's also a PayPal donate button, and these do help pay the bills and keep the operation going. For right now, since there's a lack of funds to really move forward on any of the big projects, Eric is mostly focused on writing and putting together some material for the next couple presentations. The conference, the 9th Annual Energy Science and Technology Conference, is scheduled for July 8th through 12th, which is a 5-day conference, Wednesday through Sunday. And for right now, we're sticking with that schedule. It looks like most places internationally and throughout the states are going to be open for the most part by June. And so we're just going to plan as if the conference is going to happen. You can pre-register. About a third of the seats are already sold out, and we are still taking payments. And you can pre-register for free at EnergyScienceConference.com. That's EnergyScienceConference.com, and on there you can click the register button. You can register and you'll get the updates there. And if it looks like you'd be able to come, you can purchase your tickets through there. Eric has 2 presentations planned. One is on Heavyside's work, and one is on Fortescue's work. And Eric has presented a bit on both of these people's work kind of throughout some of his other presentations. Most of them are available through emediapress.com, where we've published probably about 130 plus books and videos on these subjects of the electrical sciences and some health-related talks. And if you're just logging in and joining us, if you could help us out by just muting out your own phones so we don't hear the background noise. And do you want to kind of explain a little bit about what the 2 presentations are? And you just finished, I think, the Heavyside one.
Yeah, I'm kind of wrapping up the Heavyside one now. I'm transcribing the set of drawings to send to you to get put into archive or whatever. So this basically is another book, but it will also be the presentation. So because it's a book, I'm spending a lot of time on getting all the drawings done very accurately with everything centered and what have you, and weeding out the mistakes. So there's roughly about maybe 80 pages of drawings. Each page has, I would say on an average of 4 or 5 actual equations or schematics or vector diagrams or what have you. So, and they're all in color. So I'm basically simplifying the Heaviside electromagnetic theory and then applying it through Steinmetz's methodologies into the actual calculation of transmission systems. Some of this stuff has never been done before. So it's kind of experimental. I'm learning things as I go. So it's right now, amongst all the other delirium, this is about the only thing that's keeping me in positive spirits. Then if I can get out of here and start living in my car again without being harassed by some democratic regime, then I will begin working on the Fortescue one, which is the basically VERSOR algebra. I don't know how that's going to go about until I get started. So right now my mind is pretty much wrapped up in the Heavyside one. So that'll keep me busy up until the actual presentation time. So that's kind of what's going on right now. So some of the text and some of the drawings are on, they're not on my website, but they're on the Energetic Forum. So people can see this stuff as it gets turned out. So there doesn't really seem to be a lot of interest anymore. So that's causing me to lose my interest in the subject. But at any rate, that's about all I have to do while I'm confined. So that's pretty much where I'm at now.
Okay.
Oh, and the other thing is, I made sure that this particular call would occur at the 0-degree angle of the new sunspot, which has now gone through one revolution. It's pointed straight at us. It seems to have weakened, but in general, the sun seems to be starting to come back to life. And my afternoon radio measurements indicate the ionosphere is coming back up in strength again, and which will be good for radio propagation and that kind of stuff. So that's basically what's happening now with me. Okay.
And on energeticforum.com, in the Eric Dollard discussion thread, there's an Eric Dollard subforum, and then within there's actually a bunch of discussion threads. And the one that's been there for a long time, I think it's just called Eric Dollard. That's where Simon Davies from Tesla Scientific, he's the one that has teslascientific.com and has some different free and paid calculators for calculating Tesla coils and that kind of stuff. And he's been transcribing electromagnetic boundary condition and also putting up the images to that. Those were originally scanned and put on ericpdollard.com, but that's going into book form on Amazon as a paperback once it's fully transcribed. But he's making that available for free. So if you go to energeticforum.com, you can register for free. You have to be registered, and you can log on, and then that's how you can see the attachments, the images. You can download them, print them off, make your own free book out of it if you want.
Conference recording started.
Okay, so at least I got the beginning 8 minutes on my computer. I'll just let it go. And so
once you register at energeticforum.com, you can email Simon at help@emediapress.com with your username and or email that you use to register at Energetic Forum, and he'll approve the membership right away. And that way you can go in and you can get all the attachments and stuff. And so there's going to be a lot more coming out in that thread, or the Eric Dollard thread with the electromagnetic boundary condition. And also recently we started an electrodynamic seismic forecasting forum within the Eric Dollard forum, where Griffin Brock, he was on the call last time we did a call with Eric, and he had used a fairly simple setup to basically look at the seismic activity. And so he posted some charts and some other details related to that, and that was appropriate for last week's call, or the last call, because Eric talked quite a bit about that. Do you want to mention a little bit little more specifics about the electromagnetic boundary condition and how that fits into everything that you're working on that Simon is posting right now?
Well, electromagnetic boundary condition, that was a chapter in the presentation I gave on how the power grid's being all screwed up. So a lot of the things that I write are extensions of past presentations, because they get me interested in the subject, and then I discover things, and it gets me on a trail. So there was two things that needed to be expanded upon. One was the basic hypotheses of electromagnetism, and the other was the use of the Fortescue method for the analysis of polyphase power systems. So that is now what I'm engaged in. So I chose the title of Heaviside's original series that he published in an electrical magazine way back, called the Electromagnetic Induction and Its Propagation. So I'm kind of using that as a template. That work was censored and blocked from any further progress right at its high point, and Heaviside never continued with it. So when he wrote his book, Electromagnetic Theory, he kind of went off more into very abstract and kind of a diverse set of studies and theories and what have you that really pulled away from the core interest, which is electromagnetic propagation and what is electromagnetism, which he got into because of the difficulties they were having with the undersea telegraph cables. They just simply wouldn't pass the signals. And that had everybody up in arms. So he was the guy that made long-distance telephone and telegraph possible by mathematically analyzing that with severe opposition and harassment from the powers to be. Of course, we know there's nothing new about that. So the other one on the Fortescue method, then I've also decided to get into like a book or a presentation or however you want to look at it on that, which basically could be called Part 3 of the VERSOR algebra series, which now there's Part 1 or volume, if you would call it such, Volume 1 and 2. So number 3 will deal more with the practical applications like I did in my electrical utility presentation to teach engineers how to actually apply this methodology, because I don't think a lot of people really understand it anymore. And then maybe get into some more abstract elements of it. At this point, I have not decided until I get off into the forest, and then the seed sprouts in my head, and I get going with it. So it's a little premature to say which route that's going to go and how esoteric or practical or what have you, but that will all be done in July, and we'll see what comes out of it.
Okay. Now you're talking about this sunspot that made one full rotation. Do you want to give a little bit bigger context that goes back to the time of the last call and what was happening? I guess you can, I don't know, astronomically or astrologically.
Well, the last call, that there was a new high latitude sunspot, which basically signaled the beginning of the new solar cycle. And, of course, the thing to do is to wait the 28 days and then see what does it look like when it comes back around. So there is another set of sunspots at 90 degrees leading, which now is pointing basically 90 degrees out from the direction to the Earth, in other words, sideways. There's rather significant solar activity there, and it stirred up the ionosphere pretty good. So I can safely say that the new solar cycle has started. Unfortunately, I am unable to find anybody to get me any heliocentric planetary information. That seems to be basically no longer available, like many things are no longer available. So I can't get into the radio astrology aspect because the material just simply is not there. I have no way of knowing where the planets are at any time and have to rely on astrologers, which are very vague about that stuff. They are a geocentric rather than heliocentric operation.
Is there anything else that you want to touch on before we, well, I guess we could mention that we've been kind of working on some projects behind the scenes remotely as far as that rotating capacitor.
The Trump motor project. Yeah, that's kind of going along slowly and difficultly, but
yeah. So I did just put out a video.
There's so many things going on, that it gets a little spread out. So that project is moving rather slowly.
And it's kind of related to a potential presentation that might happen at the conference if I can get this equipment put together. That this particular Chris Carson rotating capacitor, I did just put out a video link in the last Energy Times, and it's on YouTube, where this rotating capacitor, every other plate is stationary, and then every other plate rotates 360 degrees on a common shaft, which is turned by a little DC motor. And as it's rotating, I apply about 4,500 volts DC from a potential transformer to those plates, and as I get the voltage right around that area, it shows that the motor does see a load from it a little bit. There's a few extra tests that I have to do that Eric described to me, and I'll be posting those results as I go along. And there's a few other little high voltage coil tests and stuff. I don't really want to say what it's all leading to. I got to still do some of the experiments. But as far as like checking the resonant frequency of ignition coils and looking at what the bandwidth of those different types of high voltage coils are, I'll be putting out little how-to videos. They're pretty simple that most people with a scope or a signal generator can do them. And they can just watch the video once and know how to do it, but it's kind of useful for some of this high voltage, high frequency stuff. Are there any particular questions that you'd kind of like to focus on for this call?
Yeah, I would prefer they stay, in the realms of electrical engineering and radio and, and ionosphere and that type of stuff, and not, conspiracy things or flat Earth. I don't know anything about gravity, so don't ask me about it. And
okay.
And what have you. And I think the sociological, political thing speaks for itself, so I won't say anything about that because that'll get me into a rage, and then it will be censored, so we won't get into that.
Okay, so we've got almost 45 people on the call, so hopefully there's some questions. If you do have some questions for Eric, just hit 5*, and that'll put a little flag up next to your phone number. Just hit 5*, and I can unmute you, and you can say your name, where you're from, and you can ask a question.
Aaron and Eric, how are you? This is Robert and Christy from Georgia. I was watching your music and ether talk, and you had mentioned Bruce Cathy in that, and so I hadn't heard of him before. I went and did some research on him, and Bruce was talking in one of his videos about harmonics coming off the sun and it requiring a certain timing, and that was why they did so many time-specific and location-specific tests for atom bomb testing in New Mexico. I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm not particularly a fan of Bruce Cathy. He's into that kind of Space Brothers numerology stuff, but everything has got some aspect of use to it. So I remember he was saying something about that initiating a nuclear blast was not something you could do arbitrarily, but that doesn't make sense because then you're not going to really time World War III. It's going to come when it wants. So if that was the problem, then the whole nuclear thing would be useless, and it wouldn't really do much of anything. So I tend to stay away from the Bruce Cathy crowd. That's remnants of that old borderland goofy stuff that I didn't really have a very good relationship with, and it screwed me up pretty bad. So. But that's what his thing is mostly numerological and spooky, so I don't really involve myself in that. And that's probably why I mentioned his name, was to point out that that was the case. But I'm not certain what era, that you heard me say that.
Yeah, I think you were referring to the Tibetan rock launching as a result of harmonics. And he had written something about that, and an engineer had, with secondhand information that you were talking about.
Oh, yeah. Well, he uses the word harmonics to suit his own notions, and they don't necessarily correspond to the actual engineering and mathematical scientific meaning of harmonic.
All right, good to know. You saved me some time on and some money purchasing some books. I had been wondering about that, so.
Yeah, it's just mysticism.
Good to know.
And then we have one other question, but we can wait and put our hand up again if other people have questions.
There are other questions, but go ahead.
So we actually transcribed one of your talks, Eric, and I was wondering if you could clarify one thing. You're talking about the hysteresis effect and about how Steinmetz found that when you have a current applied to an electrical system to force magnetism into existence, the rate at which the magnetism develops is not the same rate at which the magnetism dissipates. And then you go on to say, and by the way, I'm still attempting to grasp some core concepts. So I was wondering, in the talk you said the force and the forced deal don't tie together anymore. And I was wondering if you could clarify what forced deal was.
I didn't quite get what the question was because of the silly phone distortion.
Okay, let me try again. So when talking about the hysteresis effect, you talk about how Steinmetz found that when you have a current.
So what it is the path that the magnetism follows in the time cycle going up is not the same going down. It follows a different path down, and that causes a loop rather than a line. If something if cause and effect are directly related to each other, then it produces like a straight line, like, this thing you get inundated with on the TV now, with the rate of rise of the disease. You're always seeing that curve. Is the line, it basically follows that path, and then when it goes down, it doesn't loop back on itself. But with magnetism, the cause and effect become displaced from each other. So the effect will come after the cause, or the cause in some cases can actually become before the effect. So what happens is then the ladder that you climb up is not the same ladder that you climb down. So it's like if you go up the scale on a keyboard with a certain set of notes and then you follow a different set of notes going down, that opens up a loop, and that loop represents either, if it's cause before effect, it represents the disappearance of energy, and if it's effect before cause, it represents the appearance of energy. That's basically what hysteresis is.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Robert or Kathy, do you have any other questions?
Well, as a result of that, further on in that talk, you had said that well, first off, you said that electricity is not the same as matter, but you said that there was a way that electricity could move forward and backwards through time. Is that I wanted to wrap my mind around understanding that. Is that meaning that it could like a surge or something could come from a different time frame and then move backwards to something that, say, I could experience it now, or is that more of an analogy for a measurement within the time frame?
Well, mathematically, when you're dealing with Steinmetz's propagation equations for alternating current or transients, there's one wave that goes backwards in time, and there's one wave that goes forwards in time. This is essential in alternating current theory. Now, if it's a closed loop, well, then that doesn't really defy common sense or what have you, because it's basically all one cycle. So you could have something going backwards and forwards. You could have a clock that the hands go backwards on, then you could have one that the hands go forwards on. But it's the resultant of those two that's the here and now, so to speak. So when you have an alternating current cycle, you can have, like in the case with an inductive discharge, you can have the cause occur after the effect, which is not a defiance of common sense because they're in a closed loop. So it's not really, experiencing something in the distant future coming to the past. But when you're dealing with transients or a hyperbolic rather than a circular function, well, then you can get into the argument, okay, something starts to present itself before it happens. People might not like that idea, but nevertheless, when you're dealing with mathematically, you have to do it like that. So in a situation of harmonics, which I've shown in a number of presentations, if the harmonics are all in phase and are odd, each one of those individual frequencies will present itself on a time scale. But when you add them all together, they neutralize each other. Even though they're technically there, they don't present themselves except at the time of the impulse. So then you're dealing with a situation where the time of the event is not really directly connected to the times of the various cycles that make it up. If you see what I'm getting at. Do you kind of get what I'm getting at with this?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So if something starts to happen, this is something that the Greeks were using in that Van earthquake sensing system. They could tell beforehand when an earthquake was going to happen by juggling the dimensions of time and magnitude and energy and what have you, and know days or weeks before the earthquake happened just by the waveforms of all the preceding earthquakes. So they were able actually to predict the future mathematically and not have to rely upon electrical precursors, which was rather interesting. So basically the Steinmetz viewpoint, when you look at it mathematically in the equations, you have a forward wave and you have a reflected wave, just like you do in space, but you also have that in time. So you have to acknowledge in mathematical electrical engineering that things come from the future and go to the past, and come from the past and go to the future, and where they cross, that's where, that's the point on the transmission line or the cycle that you're interested in. And you can move that depending on how you load, the forward or the reflected wave or position them in time. And so I had to deal with this a lot in making these standing wave charts for some of my presentations. And it seems simple at first, but then you find it doesn't work out so simply, and you keep getting the wrong answer and keep getting the wrong answer. And what seemed like was just going to take a couple of days ended up taking a month to finally get the forward cycles and the backwards time cycles to resolve properly. So it's an interesting subject, and it kind of brings up a metaphysical aspect, or the possibility of going backwards in time, and that rumor has always been around Steinmetz, that he developed a time television to view into the past. There's no real evidence of that, but people have written about it, and it appears in places where you wouldn't expect somebody to talk about something like that just out of the blue, but it was important to bring that up in relation to what they were getting at in their book. So Steinmetz was the master of the dimension of time, and that's where electricity really resides, is in time, and the notion of the velocity of light is actually erroneous. There's no real distance involved. Everything is involved in time. And this is essential in electrical engineering. Time is where electricity acts, and not necessarily in the dimension of space. And I think in some of the papers that I've written, like the revival of the science of electricity in the digital age, I point that out, that the masters all pulled away from the concept of velocity and stuck in what they called a progression in time, and actually came out in some, like in Gilliman's case, actually came out against the notion of velocity and called it a mathematical fiction.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks. If you have any questions later, feel free to hit 5-star and we can unmute you again.
All right, perfect. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Okay, if your area code is 410, you can hear me unmuting you right now. Go ahead and say your name, where you're from, and go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, my name is David Broyles. I'm calling from Baltimore, Maryland.
Hi, go ahead.
Hi. One of my questions was if Eric could please talk about elements, and I know he doesn't believe in, I believe he doesn't believe in particle physics. I just wanted to know his thoughts about elements and like valence electrons, and if valence electrons aren't a good way to look at anything. What is a good way to look at how elements, the characteristics of elements, and how they can form into molecules without using the term of valence electrons?
Yeah, that's kind of out of my area of knowledge. The valency theory is very practical, works very well, so as a hypothesis, it seems useful, but what's actually going on, of course, nobody really knows. And after reading Wilhelm Reich's works, I'm inclined to go back to the Descartes vortex theory and this idea of physical particles and the whole gobbledygook of particle physics and the insanity that it's all gone to, and then the as I think there's a phrase, you could judge a tree by its fruits, and this whole quantum thing and quarks and all the rest of it has basically engendered a technology which is probably one of the most hideous things to ever befall the human race. So I think that's all I need to say about particle physics and the rest of that stuff.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask one more question?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of a person called Dr. Stephen Greer. He has come up with different films. One's called Undisclosed and some other ones. He's talked about Maxwell's quaternion equations.
They're called quaternions.
Okay. And that they were chopped off and changed, and Oliver Heaviside was involved with that. And I just wanted to hear, I'm not very knowledgeable in this area. I just wanted to hear your thoughts, if you feel that they were chopped off and changed by Oliver Heaviside, or in not getting the details right about a unified field theory that Maxwell was going for. Just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, well, quaternions were a very ill-conceived mathematical methodology, and it basically made it impossible to understand anything, and it had certain mathematical principles that were absolutely absurd. But that was the mathematics that was available to Maxwell to attempt to formulate his electrical theories. Heaviside, of course, changed that and went more to the vectoral, which is basically what made electrical engineering possible. But it was not just him. The whole quaternion concept basically just crashed. So the vector analysis took over, but oddly enough, the quaternion came back with the VERSOR algebra and Steinmetz, the works of Dr. Alexander McFarland, mathematician, who laid the groundwork for a lot of what Steinmetz had done. So a revived quaternion system could be very useful. I did develop one some time back. I don't know, the internet's chopped my stuff up pretty bad, so I don't know what's still out there or what's gone. But I did attempt a method that looked like it had practical value as far as dealing with geometries in space, but for most electrical work in engineering, it's algebra in time, and that's where the VERSOR algebra system comes in, which could be actually called the quaternion system. So that's kind of how all that came about. So Heaviside gets a lot of blame because he has lots of enemies. Basically, academia despises Heaviside to this day because he was the Prometheus that stole the mathematics from the gods and gave it to the engineer, and he will be resented for eternity because of that. But if it wasn't for Heaviside, we would have no electrical engineering whatsoever.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, David. Okay, let's see if you're, made a couple of lines out here. Just give me a second. Okay, if your area code is 586, you can hear me unmuting you. Go ahead and say your name, where you're from, and go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Chris Lumen. I'm from Michigan, or Detroit area. This is my first time calling into one of your phone calls, and I actually just learned about you and a little bit about what you do. Hopefully it's not too windy. I'm outside. I don't know. I guess I'm looking where to make two questions. First, about something you just said. What's wrong with, I guess, quantum, and also how do I get, I'm an electrical engineer, by the way, and how do I get started, I guess, learning about the things that you do?
Well, that's a good question. I suppose you could go back to all the references that I've mentioned. You can begin by just learning the basics of electricity and electronics. I don't know what your desires or objectives are in learning any of this. Well, if you knew where you wanted to go, maybe I could advise you better.
Well, I had the person that, and about with reference to electronics, I guess maybe it didn't come through. I am an electrical engineer. I work in I work with antennas and such, so I have some familiarity with this. Well, with general electrical engineering. But a friend of mine who mentioned you, or made me aware of the existence of you, mentioned that something about longitudinal waves being able to travel faster than light, and that Tesla had worked with that, and that was what piqued my interest in where I wanted to what I wanted to learn more about.
Okay. Yeah, that's difficult because it's never been accepted, and it's never really been quantified or put into engineerable terms. So I've written quite a bit on that, and I've given quite a few presentations on it, so which is probably about the only material you're going to get on longitudinal electrical waves that means anything. So I would basically recommend that you you go through my presentations and writings and step by step and read the references, and which are scant on that subject directly. So I did do some. Oh, actually, there's two very good videos that I did a long, long time ago that were under the Borderland Science. They were put together in association with the Borderland Science. One's called Tesla's Longitudinal Electricity, and I think the other one's called Longitudinal Transverse Waves. I think that would be your best start.
Okay. What are some of the things that I might be able to? Are there anything that can be applied with these principles, or are they still experimental?
Well, this stuff is actually, this is all going on all the time. So energy being conveyed from the primary to the secondary of a transformer is done longitudinally. The current, so-called current through an electrostatic condenser, or what's now called the capacitor, that's also done longitudinally. If you measure the phase velocity on a distribution line going from the substation throughout town, the fact that you have all these parallel inductances of the primaries of the distribution transformers, the phase velocity on that distribution line will be faster than the velocity of light. That's something that's not normally, no one even thinks of that. But if you go systematically down the line, obviously at 60 cycles a second, you're not going to see much difference. But if you were precise about it, you would find that because you have shunt inductances across the transmission line, that accelerates the velocity of the wave and makes it faster than the velocity of light. But we have to be cautious about what does the velocity of light mean and how does that come about. And that's presently what I'm putting together now in this presentation, electromagnetic induction and its propagation. Is the only reason that this velocity of light is there at all is it's the only way to get a meaningful electrical relationship when you're trying to combine electrostatic units and electromagnetic units into the same formulation, like power or impedance or what have you. So that gives the false notion that there's the propagation at the velocity of light. It's kind of a secondary effect, and that's what I was pointing out in one of the previous questions. So this is something that presents itself when you're designing these Alexanderson antennas, because the velocity, there is no velocity anymore, and it's very similar with the propagation along Tesla transformers. There's no velocity there anymore either. You can't say that it's going faster than light or it's going slower than light because there's no velocity. I gave a rather lengthy presentation on this called electrical transmission in multiple coordinate systems, which was the basically a compendium of all the work of the Bell Telephone Laboratories engineers and scientists on transmission. And I show how velocity comes about and what constitutes a longitudinal versus transverse wave, and how to apply that to filter and network design, transmission line loading, and what have you. So as I just said, if you have a transmission line and you load it with shunt inductances, the velocity, apparent velocity will exceed that of light. And if you get to a situation where the stored energy content of the electrostatic or dielectric field of the line equals the stored energy content of the magnetism and all the shunt inductances, the propagation velocity becomes undefined, and whatever is happening at the sending end, the receiving end does that in exact unison without any phase delay, which would be considered infinite velocity. But actually, the velocity is not infinite, it's undefined. There is no velocity anymore. So this is something that's done in transmission engineering. When you have very high voltage power lines, the energy storage in the dielectric field becomes so pronounced that from the, if you don't have a standing wave ratio of 1-to-1 with the load, you might start off with 220,000 volts at the sending end, which would give you 110 volts at your wall outlets, but you might end up with 280,000 volts at the receiving end of the line, which would give you 140 volts at the wall outlet, which is undesirable. So what the utility companies will do is they will put shunt inductances and load the line similar to the way a telephone line is loaded. Telephone line uses series inductances, power line uses shunt inductances. Then there's no more velocity, and the angular position of the synchronous machines at the sending end of the line will be in conjunction with the angular position of the synchronous machines at the receiving end of the line, and that will help keep the whole system in synchronization and also stabilize the voltage so that 220 at the sending end equals 220 at the receiving end. It's a bit of a juggling act.
I didn't know about those shunt parallel inductances.
Yeah, so if you put capacitors in parallel, that slows it down. So basically, like I described, if you have a set of distribution transformers and that speeds it up, well, you have to have a power factor correction capacitor bank to energize the magnetism in all of those distribution transformers, and that will bring the velocity back down, and then you can juggle those, and then when the velocity becomes equal to the velocity of light, then the system is matched.
I've never heard that explained like that.
That's one way to look at it, but that doesn't necessarily say there's a velocity, but that's one way to look at it. And there's been a couple presentations where I've gotten into details about how that process works. I forget which one's right off.
Go ahead. So in engineering, when we try to match lines, we're we don't realize it, but we're kind of creating that light transmission speed phenomenon when we do that act of matching. Is that right?
Yeah, so when you have unity power factor, then the wave is neither speeded up nor is it slowed down, then it will be right at what is considered to be then only the transmission line constants will present themselves and not the shunt capacitors or shunt inductances. They will neutralize themselves out and the line can do its thing, so to speak. And then that way, you won't get rises of voltage or fall of voltage on the line. It'll be equal. So there's about 4 different ways you can look at power factor correction, and that's one way to do it, the propagation angle method of looking at it. The other way would be to call it resonance, where you have equal energy in all the transformers with relation to the capacitors. So if you have 1,000 kVAR of transformer lugging the line down, if you put 1,000 kVA of electrostatic condensers on the line, then the energy bounces between the two in a resonant form, and then the propagation will not be disturbed.
Interesting. I have a lot more to look through then. What was the antenna that you mentioned? The antenna type?
The Alexanderson antenna.
Alexanderson antenna, okay.
Yeah, the Alexanderson antenna, when operating in the broadside mode, has an undefined propagation velocity. In other words, the phase is uniform all the way down the line. There's no lag or lead. So it's 0 degrees at the sending end and 0 degrees at the receiving end. That's essential to the Alexanderson process.
And so that 0 phase lag, that would be just undefined velocity then, the undefined phase velocity, right?
There is no longer any velocity. The thing operates solely in the dimension of time. The dimension of space has been rendered scalar. So I get into that in the appendix of the book I wrote on the Alexanderson system and Marconi system and RCA system. Hepalinas, California, so there's actual analogs and diagrams and what have you, and to the best of my ability, not having anything to take direct measurements with, and had lost the blueprints early in the game. I did the best I could to come within a reasonable order of magnitude to develop the constants of the antenna, and that's all in the appendix part of that book. And I also concluded I did a presentation called The Extraluminal Systems of Tesla and Alexanderson, but unfortunately that presentation spent most of its time on preparing the viewer to understand what was happening rather than getting into what was happening. So that was kind of a failed effort. But at any rate, that would be a good presentation to look at to get it, at that and the electrical transmission and multiple coordinate systems to deal with velocity other than the velocity of light, or to eliminate the notion of velocity of light altogether as a kind of mathematical fiction.
Okay, just writing that last part down. Electrical transmission in multiple coordinate systems.
So, Chris, I'll give you a couple websites. On ericpdollar.com, there's a free video link in the main menu bar. And if you click on that or mouse over it, there's a handful of free videos in there that Eric has done in the past. And 2 of those videos are the 2 Borderland ones. He references, I think, the Tesla longitudinal wave, and then transverse and longitudinal wave videos. Those are, you can watch those for free in there. So just ericpdollar.com, the free videos link, and you'll see the 2 longitudinal ones. And then Eric mentioned the extraluminal transmission systems of Tesla and Alexanderson. And the sequel to that is the electrical transmission and multiple coordinate systems. Both of those presentations are available through extraluminaltransmission.com.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and then the RCA book that Eric is referencing relating to the Alexanderson network is on wirelessgiantofthepacific.com.
What was that last one? The book? What book was that?
wirelessgiantofthepacific.com. I believe that was the nickname for that station in Bolinas, California.
Okay.
And it was one of these that was the whole electrostatic or longitudinal system used by the Navy for ship to shore.
Oh, I didn't know about that. Oh, that's interesting.
So, wirelessgiantofthepacific.com. There's four items in that package. One is the Wireless Giant book by Eric. Has a lot of documentation and scans of a lot of material most people have never seen, unless you actually have that book. There's also a Wireless Giant of the Pacific written by somebody that worked for the National Park Service or something that kind of documented that area around Point Reyes, I believe is what it's called.
Around what?
And then Point Reyes.
It's also called Wireless Giant of the Pacific. It was a joint effort between the two of us as residents of the Bolinas area, trying to get the station back going again, but that was Commonweal nixed that whole idea and everything got screwed up. But we both write. I wrote like the engineering and RCA history part, and he wrote the more personal history, you know, who the characters were and the timeline and what have you. So it's combined together. They're combined together into one book, which was the title of the station in its heyday, was called the Wireless Giant of the Pacific, and all the way up to the point of its forced closure was considered one of the most effective transmitting facilities on the planet as far as how its signal got out.
Interesting.
Yeah, and there's two extra documents with that package. One is it's more of an excerpt from the history of communications electronics in the United States Navy, and it's relevant to the whole Bolinas RCA topic, and also an extract from a General Electric Review back in the 1920s, and that goes over some general history and technical details of the whole Alexanderson development. So all four of those are in the package at Wireless Giant of the Pacific. So yeah.
Also, I'll point out that that you can actually show a working Alexanderson system that I built in the most recent presentation, which is electrodynamic seismic forecasting.
Yeah, and that's available at emediapress.com/Eric Dollard /musical seismograph. And on that page, yeah,
emediapress.com emediapress.com /what?
Eric Dollard /musical seismograph. And that's where the electrodynamic seismic forecasting presentation is, and also the musical seismograph presentation from a couple of years ago that I recorded while down at Eric's shop because he wasn't able to make it to the conference. And that presentation is actually probably about five different presentations all put together as one.
Okay.
That should be enough to keep you busy for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of seems like...
It took a good share of mine to figure out all that to put it together with.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff. It seems like there's a common theme here of a lot of this stuff that we've been doing in electrical engineering where we try to keep this, match things and make these antennas be electrically long has been not exactly the best way to go about things. Is that am I kind of along the right lines there?
Yeah, most of the original material has all been lost. or perverted by theoretical physicists such as Einstein, what have you. Really, Einstein did more to destroy the understanding of electricity than any man that ever existed in human history.
Yeah.
And basically, there is no more electrical engineering. It's just all, software programming, what have you. The physicists have really made a mess out of it, and that's what I tried to correct in my paper, Revival of the Science of Electricity in the Digital Age, because the very notion of electricity is suppressed and outlawed by the same people that bring you global warming and COVID-19 and all the rest of their twisted, whatever you want to call it, non-realities to keep people in check. And physicists have a really intense pathological hatred for the science of electricity. Therefore, they have suppressed it. And Tesla and Heaviside are probably the people that they despise the most. So if you're an electrical engineer, you would probably find the the presentation I did on the electrical history, theory, and practice of the electrical utility system, I believe was the title. That one's a monster. It's about 5 or 6 hours long. But it's everything you'd ever want to know about power transmission.
It's the history of what?
Yeah.
History,
So you can
theory,
just
and practice. Yeah, go ahead, Aaron. You know what it is.
Yeah, history, theory, and practice of the electrical utility system. And you can go to emediapress.com/Eric Dollard and then /utility.
That one is actually specifically orientated, towards the lineman and the utility power engineer. It's a complete 4-year college course on the subject.
Okay.
Damn near killed me to put it together.
Well, if we can maybe get on to some other questions here. Yeah, and if you have any more questions, just hit my phone and we can get back up.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Okay, let's see. A couple people in the same area code, so I'll just do the last 4. If your phone number ends in 9121, I'm unmuting you right now. Go ahead and say your name, where you're from, and go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Luis. I'm in the DMV area. I work all around this. I'm just getting started looking at your work, Eric, so forgive my ignorance. I have one initial question and then maybe a follow-up question, and that would be, would you consider light and electricity to be the same thing, or, yeah, that's basically it.
No, they're not the same. Light could be considered to be like maybe a subset of electricity or a special form of it.
Yeah, like visual light, but saying like would you consider like the electromagnetic spectrum will all be like propagations of the same thing, it's just at varying frequencies? I mean, and again, sorry if I'm butchering any terms or anything like that.
Well, electromagnetism is a very specific form of electricity and not necessarily its natural form. The Maxwell electromagnetic theory of light is a hypothesis and not something to be taken, as the word of God or absolute truth or fact. And considering that it led to Einstein's theory of relativity, that would kind of suggest that maybe it's not a very useful theory when you're dealing with electricity.
Right.
Yeah, there is the idea or notion that has not been directly confirmed, but people that have been in outer space working for NASA, the so-called astronauts, have indicated that there is no direct light in outer space, only reflected light. So the whole Einsteinian notion that it takes so many light years for light to propagate from a distant part of the galaxy to here is conceivably a falsehood. But without direct measurement, it's hard to say. But it all seems to make sense when you start looking back into some of the more fringe area stuff like Tesla and Wilhelm Reich. There's really, particularly Wilhelm Reich, there's really no reason for the velocity of light. There's no reason for calling the light that you see from the sun on the wall to say that in the space between the sun and the light that you see on the wall that the sun puts there is light. That it could be something else. So basically, these modernistic concepts we have are really metaphysics. There's no basis in absolute fact because you can't necessarily take measurements on these kind of things. And once you get endeared to the Einstein-Maxwell velocity of light notion, then you can't see out of it.
Yeah, and I'm not down that rabbit hole. What would you say that is if it's not light, but the sun is emitting them? No, would it like degradation of ether, or?
Well, we don't know, but it could be some form of longitudinal electric ray. It's like a tidal wave. When a tidal wave propagates from the source of disturbance through the ocean, there's no evidence of it whatsoever. You could be in a submarine, you could be in a ship, you could be on a sailboat. There's absolutely no evidence of the massive speed and horsepower that propagates through the area that you're sitting on. But as soon as that thing hits a discontinuity and turns into a transverse wave, then it manifests itself in full force. So this is quite possibly what is going on between propagation from the sun to the earth with regards to light. Now, of course, the first thing the Einsteiners are going to say, well, we know that it's the velocity of light because we put electromagnetic transmitters out there on satellites and space probes and all that, and it takes 8 minutes for the radio waves to get from the sun. Well, that's not light, that's radio waves, electromagnetic waves. So we can't turn the sun on and off and know, what the time constant is for the light to get from the sun to the earth. So we're not that much farther advanced than we were in Newton's time or what have you. It's just we've become loaded with so many endearments that now, over time have petrified themselves into this icon of stone. We really have to kind of start all over again.
That's what's going to happen. I feel that there's a lot of people. I mean, it might not even be within my lifetime. I'm 27, but I'm seeing a movement, people that are self-educated, and they're cataloging all your work, and it might not be something to be understood, in my lifetime, but I see doing the work that you're doing, like being, hope that there are some intelligible people out there that aren't fully into believing, the democracy that we currently have. So I'm an animator, and I see things visually. So my second question would to you be, based on what you said, would space only exist within if you? I mean, I look at things as like negative, positive. Like if you look at it within that simplistic realm where you have a positive core, it attracts the opposite polarity, negative. And when you have something being emitted, like let's say the sun is emitting, just to keep it stupidly simple, and it's just an analogy. It's spitting out electrons, and those electrons repel each other, and it comes into a positive core like the Earth that wants those electrons, that then you would feel some type of speed of inductance measure like, oh, this is, this is physical reality. But in between the emission and it reaching its load, would there be there be no space there? And that's where you're talking about there be no space when you're outside, when you're in outer space, there is no distance. Am I making sense?
Yeah, the only problem is your silly phone's got a really bad squelch problem, and it takes about a third of a second to start when you talk, so you're all chopped up. Maybe Aaron might be able, he might have got it better. He understands silly phones better than I do. I can't understand silly phones.
Yeah, it was kind of choppy on my end too. I think you were kind of getting into the.
I think you were kind of getting into the space versus counter space, but I'm not certain.
Yes, exactly. So So the reason I'm asking this question is that I'm trying to visualize this into an animation, and I've been doing animations for over a decade, and I'm getting to the point where I can start to visualize some of these systems, but I need to better understand them, even if it's a crude visual way of, how these things could potentially work. So, for example, whatever the emission of the sun is, would you say that while it's in path, while it's en route to, hitting us in Earth, would you say that there's no space? It's only once it hits like a physical object that then there would be it would have some type of physical attribute?
Yeah, I couldn't get that.
All right. Well,
so there's, I can kind of understand it. It's still kind of choppy, but looking at it from that perspective, there's a lot of things around us that we can just see that it kind of operates that way. For example, the sun does not warm the earth. It's freezing cold, right? It's almost absolute zero between the sun and the earth. We get infrared from the sun, but we don't actually get the heat. And when the infrared comes into our atmosphere, then it has molecules to create friction with, and so the heat is created local. It doesn't come from the sun.
Right.
That's kind of along the lines of what you're looking at. If you go outside in your backyard at midnight, look up into the sky, the sunlight is streaming right past the earth into the dark sky, but how come it's pitch black?
Gotcha.
Right?
Can you hear me better now, by the way?
Yeah, it seems a little better.
Okay. So what you just said made me, and this will be my last question. There is a guy, his name is Theoria Apothesis. That's his YouTube handle.
That's Ken Wheeler.
Yeah, Ken Wheeler. Yep.
Yeah.
He did a video where he's doing thermal imaging of the moon, and he shows how when things come in contact with moonlight, it's actually colder than things that are, in the shadow. So is that something that at all, sparks your interest, and, what kind of phenomena could be responsible for that?
Yeah, that kind of goes against my observations, because I remember looking at the moon through a very large telescope, and I could feel the heat on my eye of the light that the telescope gathered. So I don't know exactly what he's using as a sensing medium.
He's using like a thermal, I think maybe like an infrared thermal image camera that shows, that typical, red scale image.
Yeah, I'd have to see it to really get an idea. So it's kind of out of I don't know what to say about that, because we have two different observations. I sensed heat, and he's observing a cold, but it's...
Yeah, but his is not direct. His is looking at, what the device is reading. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
I can figure out a way to send Aaron the video, but it was something that just, struck me as why that could be.
Yeah, he's got some rather interesting sensors built. So
yeah.
He's also seemed to have created quite an interest in Steinmetz,
and your work.
Yeah, so I guess from my observation, he has a whole wave of Steinmetz interest going out there, but the people that are interested in it are more interested in kind of a metaphysical aspect, and they're not really paying attention to what Steinmetz was talking about because they're not electrical engineers. So
right.
It doesn't help with the understanding of Steinmetz because people are just kind of tripping on it, which is okay. At
yeah,
least,
it's not a real engineer looking at it practically.
It gets his name out there, but it just makes it more metaphysical.
Yeah, it makes it like multi-personality type thing.
It's good. I'm not complaining. Steinmetz's name's getting out there. People are exposed to it, and whatever they want to do with it is fine.
So, if I could ask one more, or is my time?
Yeah, go ahead and ask one more, and then we'll go on to another question. Sure.
Okay, so I'm just getting started on all these concepts, so I don't. If anything I say is ignorant, please forgive me. So looking at the fact that the Earth at surface temperature, right? We have our surface temperature, and it's not till you get to like the ionosphere that it's like 6,000 degrees, and then similar with the sun, where at the surface you have like 6,000 degrees, and then on its I can't remember what that layer it's called, but it's not at the surface, but like out into like the sun's way out in the sun's atmosphere is where you reach like millions of degrees. I think it's called the chromosphere. Yeah. I knew it wasn't ionosphere, but it's like its own version of that.
Yeah, that's where the real action's at, is in the chromosphere.
Right. So to me, that reminds me. So I'm just getting started learning about motors, and I work with an electrical engineer. He's like like a field engineer, like one like old school engineer, and that reminds me a lot of like how when you have a motor in a stator, it's that activity that's generating the induction. So that to me feels like a similar type of mechanism happening where the magnetic field around the Earth is scrubbing against something, and it's at that layer where at that boundary point where you're seeing the interaction between the Earth's field and whatever it's scrubbing against, whether that's ether, I don't know, but what any thoughts on that? And this is someone else's work that I'm kind of like pseudo referencing, so I would like to hear what your take is on what I just said.
Yeah, that's kind of a good analogy. There's I'm trying to think of which of Wilhelm Reich's books. Cosmic Superimposition. He gets into these kind of ether interactions, what he called the orgone, and the how these forces interact and then give rise to material which wasn't normally there. So it's kind of a creation process. So that's kind of what you're describing. You have the cosmic medium interacting with the medium that is bound to the Earth, and then it produces these effects like the aurora borealis and what have you. So that's a valid analogy.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate your time and you taking and being so humble to still doing these things after so many years.
Okay. You're welcome.
All right, brother. Take care.
Hello, Eric. This is James McDonald in Odenton, Maryland. I want to ask a question about an experiment I've done in my bedroom, but I got to explain the experiment a little bit. The question is going to be is why a 15,000 microfarad 50-volt capacitor doesn't blow up when over 2,000 volts goes onto it, high frequency-wise. I have a high-frequency power supply which goes from 1 kilovolt to 20 kilovolts and puts out 20 kc to 50 kc frequency. It's run into a three-dimensional stack of coaxial cables wrapped as Tesla pancake coils. And out the other side of it, I have a couple LEDs. They're 12-volt LEDs. They're about 30 watts a piece. And I have this capacitor after that. And when it's hooked up in two-wire mode, the voltmeter across the capacitor measures around 700 volts. But as soon as you unhook the ground, the high voltage frequency, it just goes through the roof. And the current that was measured went through the roof, and then fluorescent tubes start lighting up. And the capacitor had pegged the meter, it went over 2,000 volts. And I just wanted to know what's going on, and why did the capacitor not blow up?
Well, because that voltage wasn't real. It was the high frequency is making the meter go goofy.
Okay, but it is lighting up 12-volt LED bulbs too, as a one-wire.
At that frequency, the voltage across the capacitor should be zero.
Oh, really?
So what's happening is the high frequency field is making the meter read, just like the way I use my Simpson 260 volt ohm milliamp meter for field strength measurement. This is something that Aaron and I do all the time while we're building things. You only need one wire.
Yeah.
And the voltage that you're reading is not a real voltage anymore. It's the field strength. It has nothing to do with electromotive force. At that point, it's just measuring the electrostatic potential like a field strength meter, around the radio transmitter would. So that's one of the reasons why you shouldn't use digital instruments for any of this stuff, because they can be very misleading. And even analog instruments can be misleading if you use them in ways that they were not meant to be used.
Okay, so when the ground was unhooked off the high voltage power supply, the current shot through the roof, and that's when I got the fluorescent tubes and all to light up at a distance. And this was all done. Something
resonated, or was unloading the power supply. Or I can't really say because I can't see the setup that you have. And this high-frequency stuff can be very misleading.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot for your comments.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, James.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's see. We're getting close to 1:30 here. I guess we can take one or two more questions before we wrap it up if anybody has any questions. Again, you can go to ericpdollard.com, and there's a donate link. If anything helps, there's an address where you can send check or money orders to an address in Spokane, Washington, and I basically just send those down to the bank in Nevada. And there's also a PayPal link where you can donate online, and that helps pay the utility bills and insurance and that kind of stuff. So yeah, any donations through EPD Laboratories Inc. Through the website ericpdollard.com. All the information is on there. It is a 501c3 registered in Nevada, so all donations are tax deductible, and it does help to support the work that Eric's doing. Let's see. Okay, we have a question. If your area code is 330, I'm going to unmute you. If you can say your name, where you're from, and go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, hi, my name is Rich. I'm from Northeast Ohio. I've been studying Dollard's work probably for about 5 years or so here on and off. I'm an electronic technician by trade, play with amateur radio as a reference. I just finally have started to get into some of this VERSOR algebra stuff, and I've looked into what I can find online and compared it to some of Steinmetz references, specifically low balance of polyphase systems, which it gets a little hard to tell where he's referencing three-phase and, you know, what part is associated with that and then what part is the polyphase. I was just wondering if there are any other references you might have, Heaviside or Maxwell, or if there's any places where I have an impedance bridge that can measure susceptance and reluctance and other secondary parameters, and I'm not sure if there's any circuits that could demonstrate or, you know, basically I could play around with some of this VERSOR algebra and then demonstrate it, you know, with equipment and see how close the math matches the results. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, well, if you're going to deal with VERSOR algebra, you're going to have to deal with polyphase systems. So you're going to have to either develop your own polyphase source of power, or you're going to have it coming in from a utility company. The definitive book on the subject is called, let's see, Symmetrical. Hold on, let me go look at my library and get the title. Just a second. The book is called Symmetrical Components by Wagner and Evans. And that's considered the standard textbook on the subject.
All right, Symmetrical Components by Wagner and Evans. Great. Yeah. And I do have multiple signal generators. I mean, I think I could tie those together for a polyphase source. Is that correct?
Well, but they're going to have to be phase coherent. You know, you're going to have to, they have to be synchronized with each other.
Right, right.
Otherwise, the phases are just going to wander.
Okay. All right. Hey, thank you very much. I really appreciate your work.
You're welcome.
All right. Thanks, Rich. You're unmuted if you want to ask your question. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I called last time and talked to Eric about, and he mentioned something about Bob Beck, and I was curious about I sold some of his brain tuner devices back in the 90s, and I was curious if you had any understanding of the theory behind those devices.
No, I'm not really that familiar with what he was working on. A lot of that was before my time in that neighborhood, even though I did know him personally. His
okay.
was kind of a different area than what I was working on, so I'm not certain about it.
Okay, well, I did have another question. I read, this is kind of I read that I don't know if you were familiar being in the Navy, but about the last couple of years, the Navy's had a problem with running into other boats, and it showed that their electronic systems were either jammed or failing. And this article claimed that they called in all of their carrier groups to come back into port, and they were retrofitted with some kind of Tesla technology that would allow them to have a shield around them as a defense system. Have you heard anything like that?
No, that doesn't really sound feasible. I think if they're running into each other, it's because no one really knows how to build any of that stuff anymore. The ships are all built wrong. They're wide connecting all the power systems. They're using the hull as a neutral. Interference is rampant everywhere. Nothing works. And it's the myth of Babylon unfolding, is that the Einstein concept of electricity, which is basically destroying the entire utility grid, and it looks like it's being done deliberately. This is also being introduced into not only the American Navy ships, but Japanese Navy ships and what have you. So we have a situation here where the snake is eating its tail, and don't expect anything to work anymore. So they're probably running into each other because the systems become so complicated that they don't have radar screens. They're relying on computers. People can't think, they don't care. It's basically the whole sociological, technological breakdown of society before it completely rots.
One final, John Casey, I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a former meteorologist with NASA, and he's been working on a seismic detection system. And he has a video out, and he claims that the magnetosphere of the Earth is shrinking in proportion to the corona around the sun, and in doing so, it lowers the allows more cosmic rays, X-rays in, and it's causing. And he claims cyclically that this causes pandemics because we become our immune system goes down and we become more susceptible to viruses. He thinks civilizations have actually collapsed in the past because of it. He's also a big proponent of the grand solar minimum.
Yeah, that's I've observed situations where solar flares, very intense solar flares, usually result in influenza-type symptoms. Now,
yeah, that's what he said. Yeah,
in a solar minimum, that's the opposite. But then again, it's a known fact that the Earth's ability to shield against cosmic rays is altered, it's diminished during solar minimums, and so basically you have a double frequency type deal where not only the maximum but the minimum can create biological complications, earthquakes, and what have you. So that's
right.
That's valid. That is what's going on. As far as the solar minimum creating the blue, that's unlikely. That's a contrivance, basically a terrorist attack upon the United States and the free world by the communist Chinese, and has nothing to do with the sun whatsoever.
The rumor is, just incidentally before I get off, that there was 15 viruses actually built with payloads in them, and only 4 of them are out there right now, and the other 11 are on the shelf waiting to be used. I don't know if you've heard that one, but there's a lot of rumors.
Right now, in this situation that we're in, the last thing you want to do is start soaking up rumors.
Oh no, I totally understand. Thank you for answering the question.
Right now, you can't believe anything you hear. It's just a roar noise. If you can figure out a way to pick the signal out of it, then you're ready to communicate with people on the other end of the universe.
Just real quickly, can you give me, or can you say, I know you don't like 5G, and they're rolling it out regardless. And I heard somewhere that the 5G doesn't work unless they have amplifier stations on top of the transmitter, around the transmitters. It won't go through glass or walls. They need an amplifier on top of what they already have. Or have you heard anything like that?
The 5G thing is so ill-conceived that, it's just like, what you were asking, why the ships are crashing into each other. It's all coming apart.
Okay, that's good to know.
It almost appears to me, from my limited knowledge on the subject, as far as what goes on molecularly and what have you in that band, but I know from Bell telephone engineering practice that it's senseless to use those frequencies because of oxygen absorption and that kind of stuff, and multipath reflection, which was what caused the failure of UHF television, was the multipath. It appears to me to be more of a biological weapon than a communication system, if you want to look at it from a conspiratorial standpoint. I think it's one of the most ill-conceived things that has ever spawned out of the human mind.
There's a woman out there named Elena Friedman, and she's talking about a thing called digital biology. She claims that the 5G and the nanoparticles are really a threat to the human race.
Oh, yeah. I won't argue with that. Bill Gates wants to get his jizz into your bloodstream so it can eat your brain from the inside out so they don't have to force you into lobotomy.
Yeah. I ran into Bill Gates years ago in the 70s when he killed digital research and the original CPM system. He stole it, and my job disappeared. All kinds of people lost their jobs because of that guy.
He's a grade A creep.
Oh yeah, you wonder. It almost makes you believe that there's such things as psychopathic leaders.
Yeah, he ranks right up there with Hitler.
All right. Have a good afternoon, and I'll try to get a donation off to you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. If your number ends in, actually, if you're in a 208 area code, I'm unmuting you right now. Go ahead and introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I guess, thanks for taking my question. I guess first, I don't want to derail too much if you haven't said everything you wanted to about the sun, earthquakes, and societal events.
And what is your name?
My name is Paul. I'm from Washington.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead and ask your question. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was curious on constant current sources. If you have any suggestions, Eric, for a constant current source that could spike voltage to, be able to run a spark gap or something like that. Thanks.
Well, that's what an ignition coil does.
Oh, okay. I appreciate it. That's all I needed.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Let's see, if your area code is 514, I'm unmuting you. Go ahead and introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hey, what's up? My name's Tan. I'm in Montreal. I have a question about plasma and electric plasma and sound systems. I've been researching how to build a sound system, a plasma sound system, and I heard you had built some amplifiers. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, don't know which amplifier you're talking about. You mean like an audio amplifier for music reproduction?
Exactly, audio amp.
Yeah, I have a new amplifier design, a vacuum tube design. That's actually one sitting on the bench right now, operating. In it's going through kind of the proof of performance life test for the seismic transducer amplifiers. So yeah, I do have a new type of audio amplifier design, but it's basically the cost of developing it and getting it out is so prohibitive that basically it's just going to be something that sits on my bench.
Well, where can I learn more about? I'm sure you've made some videos about that audio amp. I heard it mentioned in passing in one of your videos, but I haven't seen anything more. I'm a musician, and I'm interested in high quality sound reproduction. So hearing that this was something that reproduced sound and had a transduction to ultraviolet rays, is that correct? It also results in ultraviolet?
No. Well, you might be the so-called cosmic induction generator and flame speaker thing. I had developed that sometime back in Santa Barbara with absolutely stunning results, but again, to do any of this stuff anymore, there's no money for any of these kind of things. So basically, it's all a dead horse. If you want to see the amplifier that I was talking about and the theory of its operation, that's in the presentation called the musical seismograph.
Okay, got it. Seismograph.
That's emediapress.com/Eric Dollard/musical seismograph.
Thanks. Got time for one more quick question. It's about plasma hydrogen water electrolysis. I'd read a study recently that was an experiment done in 2009 where a radio wave who is the experiment done by? Doesn't say here. But basically they took a vial of water and applied a 13.56 megahertz polarized radio frequency beam to it, and it caught fire. The water caught fire from the frequency. Would that be something that's useful in building? Do you have any comments about that?
No, I don't really know. I don't know too much about that. I know it's possible. I have ideas on that subject, but that's kind of way out of my range of what I'm interested in working on right now. Right now, the dominant project right now, if there was any money at all to do anything, would be the musical seismograph.
Cool. Okay, got it. Well, I just picked up that musical seismograph kit, so I'm going to go over it with a comb. Thanks for your time.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah, it sounds like you were describing John Canzias' experiment. He was looking for a cancer treatment, and he was using radio waves and set the salt water on fire. Let's see. Okay, Harold in Bellevue, go ahead and... okay, you're unmuted. Go for it.
Hey, Aaron. Hey, Eric. Just want to thank you guys for putting this call together today. I had a couple questions. I want to keep them short and sweet, but kind of getting back towards your electrodynamic seismic forecasting system. I understand that you're having difficulty finding heliocentric data. However, I was wondering if you suspect that there is extra heliocentric influence, such as out of our solar system, that is influencing your seismic forecasting system. In my studies of your live calls and presentations, I think that you mostly focus on the sun because it's the most tangible data that we have.
Yeah, I don't understand. What's the question?
Oh, my apologies. My question was whether or not you suspected that most of the signals that you were picking up were coming from inside our solar system, or if that you suspected perhaps they were coming from outside, and that's why you're trying to seek more heliocentric data.
No, I need the heliocentric data just to draw the VERSOR diagrams of the solar system and see how it relates to the sun.
Okay.
That's a project that I worked on some time ago with the equipment provided by RCA, and it was, you would say, my postgraduate study at Sonoma State College was the Nelson radio astrology system utilized by the Radio Corporation of America. So I want to start that up again, but all that scientific information that used to be so readily available in the 80s is now all digital, has basically made any of this stuff so hard to get that I don't seem to be able to get any of it. I can't get books anymore or any of the things that the government used to print out. And I can't find anybody to help me get this stuff off the Internet. I can't find it on the Internet. Other people don't seem to be able to. So there's nothing I can do. Just information is not available, and there's nothing I can do. So it's a dead horse.
Okay. Well, I have been trying to follow your posts on the forum. If you could perhaps ask there more specifically what to search for. I understand that Google is a very, very heavy pay-to-play game. So maybe I could donate some time in that aspect. I noticed that you had posted something in regards to your next presentation, and I want to make sure I understood it right, that in your explanation that the impulse from the load is kind of a bridge or a balance between the states before and after the load is activated?
Right. It's a
okay, I'm sorry.
State.
Okay.
That's where the electromagnetism lives, is in the transitional state.
Okay. Awesome. Sorry. I want to get a little bit off topic, and I know that you try and stick to your areas of expertise, But recently, while surfing the depths of the web, I came across something on the Los Alamos National Laboratory site. It was archived way back when. It's from Hans Alfven, and it was talking about black holes. I know that you're not particularly fond of that subject, but the quote that I want to, it said that immense plasma streams can appear to be falling towards nothing when they're actually repelling. And I kind of wanted to use that to lead me into the question in regards to the cosmic induction generator versus a Tesla coil. I noticed in your presentations you said that you believed lightning discharges are collapses into counter space. And I was wondering if that is similar to what you think is going on inside the emissions from a Tesla coil.
Yeah, it's related. The cosmic induction generator is based on Wilhelm Reich's book, Cosmic Superimposition, and it uses two Tesla coils out of phase with each other to produce the superimposition from the standpoint as Reich viewed it, which produced the galactic formations and the plasma balls and what have you.
Okay, cool. Thank you for your time. I had one more question. It's kind of off topic. Do you guys mind?
No. Go ahead.
Okay. I know there's a lot of disinformation around Thomas Townsend Brown. However, in my readings, he had an electrometer to measure sidereal radiation. And in my understanding, he was trying to measure directionally where the radiation was hitting us from space. Have you ever read anything about the electrometer that he referenced?
No. Who's
okay.
that? T. Thompson Brown?
Yeah, Thomas Townsend Brown.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with his work other than I recall he was doing something with the gravity potential and charged capacitors, if I remember right.
Okay, well, I plan on writing you. If I can find the electrical diagram, I'll make sure to include it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, guys.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thanks, Charlie. Okay, well, we're getting close to 2 hours. Any final comments, Eric, or?
No.
Okay. Well, I do want to mention that on Eric's page, if you're able to support EPD Laboratories, Inc., it would be appreciated. Anything helps. It's at ericpdollard.com, and there's a donate link where you can either send a donation or you can make one through PayPal. And the organization operates solely on donations. And also, Eric is going to be at the conference. If we have a conference in July, there is a possibility we'll move the date forward, or we'll do some type of live streaming event. I just kind of have to make it up as I go along because nobody really knows what's going on. But in any case, the current schedule is July 8th through the 12th. You can go to EnergyScienceConference.com, and you can register free with no obligation. And if it looks like you're able to come, you can purchase a ticket. I do know that a lot of the hotel rooms are, a lot of the lodging prices are getting pretty low as far as cost goes because the whole industry is over 90% down. So even though it's kind of a more expensive time of the year being in the summer, it might wind up being less expensive. Also, Eric's presentations, you can find them on emediapress.com. We'll put some of the subtitles for these presentations into this video as reference. So once this is on YouTube, you can just kind of scan through it to see what the web addresses are. And can't really think of anything else at this point, so I guess we can go ahead and wrap it up. So no final comments or requests or anything, or do you have anything in mind as far as a next call goes relating to any type of...
I'm kind of planning on doing it like every 28 days to stay in synchronization with the sun.
Okay.
And
okay.
I don't know, if I'll be here or I'll be in Oregon. Normally, I start migrating this time of year, but I don't want to end up migrating into a hotbed of democratic fascism, so I'm kind of leery about going anywhere without some advanced intelligence. But at any rate, I'm very anxious to get back to living in my car and get out of this box. So,
okay.
but that particular date, 28 days from now, would be about the time that I would normally return to this area to take care of business. So that's what we'll figure on, is 28 days from today. I'll do another one of these.
So that'd be May 30th, tentatively speaking.
Yeah,
that'd be set, 4 Saturdays from now. So
yeah,
okay.
They all seems to work out on Saturdays, so that's good so far. It's a good day for it.
Yeah, and it's noon Pacific time. Seems to work out good. So, okay. Well, thanks a lot, Eric, and thanks a lot, everybody. We'll see you on the next call.
Thank you for your time.
Can I jump in real quickly?
Yeah?
Yeah, go for it.
Hey, thanks, guys. This is Robert from Indiana. I appreciate everything that you both do so greatly. I wanted to just ping you with a good question here, Eric. You've mentioned before understanding the work of Steinmetz is essentially patenting the alternating current to be like patenting the square root of -1. For a lay person and someone who's not an electrical engineer, how should we understand that, or what does that mean?
Well, that means multiple coordinate systems. You have to get out of the normal, left-hand, right-hand coordinate system and get into something that has more dimensions, for lack of a better word.
No, that makes sense. I understand that. It's almost like taking your thinking of kind of a this or that and upping it to a neither this nor that, or a something that's in between this or that, as well as this or that.
Yeah, it's like looking in a mirror. When you look in the mirror, right and left are reversed, but up and down aren't.
Right. Exactly right. Okay, yeah, just wanted to throw that at you. And again, both, I did shoot a quick note to each of you in the snail mail. I hope that has made it already or will make it here shortly next week. Thanks so much again for putting this together, Aaron. And Eric, your information and knowledge is so amazing. And we really, all of us I know on the call, certainly are owing a debt of gratitude to both of you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you're welcome.
What's an example?
And I will mention, if anybody wants to write Eric a letter, write it to the Lone Pine address, which is listed on the website. It's Eric Dollard, General Delivery, Lone Pine, California. And I think it's 93545, but you can look up the zip code. So, okay, thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.